Part 1: The Discovery. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. The way Eric's phone always seemed to be glued to his hand, how he'd tilt the screen away when I walked by, or how he suddenly had work meetings on Saturdays. But I was too wrapped up in my own world, my job, our life together, to pay close attention. It started innocently enough. That Tuesday evening, I was tidying up the living room while Eric showered upstairs. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a notification. First I ignored it. It wasn't unusual. Eric got work messages all the time. But when it buzzed a second time and I glanced at the screen, my heart stopped. The message preview read, "Jessica, I can't wait to spend forever with you, my love, red heart." For a moment I just stared at the screen, convinced I was hallucinating. Jessica? Forever? My love? I scrolled back in my mind through every friend or colleague Eric had ever mentioned, but nothing clicked. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I knew it was wrong to snoop, but curiosity, or maybe instinct, overpowered my conscience. Unlocking his phone wasn't hard. His passcode was my birthday. I felt an ironic pang of betrayal as I entered it, realizing how intimate a gesture that had seemed at the time. The chat with Jessica opened before me, and the more I read, the more the world as I knew it unraveled. There were photos, selfies of Jessica smiling in front of wedding venues, snapshots of her in a wedding dress, texts where they debated honeymoon destinations. My stomach churned as I scrolled up and saw Eric's responses. "You'll be the most beautiful bride, Jessica. Just wait a little longer, baby. Everything's falling into place. I love you more than words can say." I didn't even notice the tears streaming down my face until a sob escaped my throat. But it wasn't just Jessica. Oh no, it was so much worse. Eric wasn't careful. The texts with Jessica were in a group of pin chats. Below hers were two other names, Samantha and Lena. My shaking fingers tapped into each conversation, each one unraveling a new nightmare. Samantha had pictures of a house they were supposedly going to buy together, while Lena was thanking him for the ring he'd given her. A cheap band she was convinced was a family heirloom. I felt like I was in a bad soap opera. Each woman thought Eric was her devoted fiancé. Each had her own thread of promises and declarations of love. My husband, the man I had trusted with my heart, my future, was planning 3 weddings. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but it was swallowed by the tidal wave of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did he love any of them? Did he ever love me? I heard the water shut off upstairs and panicked, quickly locking the phone and setting it back on the table. I grabbed a throw pillow and hugged it tightly, trying to steady my breathing. When Eric came down, towel drying his hair, he gave me a kiss on the forehead, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Hey babe," he said casually. "You okay? You look like you've been crying." "Oh, just a sad part in the show I was watching." I lied, my voice quivering. He smiled, ruffling my hair like I was a child. "You're too soft-hearted for your own good." I watched him sit down beside me, completely unbothered, as though he wasn't living a double, or rather quadruple life. My hands balled into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to figure out my next move. I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but I was determined to find out. Part 2: The Confrontation. The next day I could barely concentrate at work. My thoughts swirled with fragments of text messages and photos, and every time I thought about Eric's casual smile as he kissed me goodnight, my blood boiled. By the time I got home that evening, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't hold this in any longer. I needed answers. Eric was already home, lounging on the couch with a beer in hand, watching some action movie he'd probably seen a dozen times. He glanced up as I walked in, his expression warm and familiar. For a fleeting moment I hesitated. How could someone who seemed so ordinary, so mine, be capable of this level of betrayal? "Hey babe," he said with a grin, gesturing toward the kitchen. I picked up takeout. "Figured you'd be tired." The kindness in his tone almost broke me. But I wasn't going to let his niceties distract me from the storm brewing inside. I set my bag down and leaned against the counter, watching him carefully. "Eric," I began, my voice sharper than I intended. "Who's Jessica?" The smile froze on his face, the kind of freeze that only comes from a deer-in-the-headlights moment. He blinked, setting his beer down on the coffee table. "Jessica?" he repeated like he was trying to place the name. "What are you talking about?" I walked over and stood in front of him, arms crossed. "Don't play dumb with me. I saw the texts, Eric. The wedding plans. The honeymoon ideas. Who is Jessica?" His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, and then he laughed nervously. Babe, she's just a coworker. She's been going through a rough patch with her fiancé, and I've been helping her out. You know me. I'm just trying to be nice. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Nice? Nice enough to plan a wedding with her? Nice enough to tell her you love her more than words can say? Eric, I saw the messages. Stop lying to me. The color drained from his face. He sat back, rubbing his hands over his face like he was trying to erase the mess he'd made. Okay, fine, he mumbled. I messed up. But it's not what you think. Not what I think. I said, my voice rising. You're engaged to 3 other women, Eric. How am I supposed to misinterpret that? His eyes widened. 3? Wait, what are you talking about? I grabbed my phone and opened the screenshots I'd saved from his messages, throwing it onto his lap. He stared at the screen, scrolling through the damning evidence, his hands trembling slightly. Lena, Samantha, Jessica. Ring any bells? His silence spoke louder than any excuse he could have come up with. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of rage and heartbreak threatening to consume me. What is wrong with you? I demanded, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Was I not enough for you? Was this some kind of sick game? Eric finally looked up at me, his face a mask of guilt and desperation. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he muttered. It just happened. I didn't want to hurt you. I let out a hollow laugh, stepping back as though his words were physically pushing me. You didn't want to hurt me? Eric, you were stringing 3 women along while you were married to me. You've destroyed all of us. Do you even care about anyone but yourself? He tried to stand, reaching for my hand, but I recoiled. Wait, he pleaded. I can explain. It wasn't about love, okay? It was about control. I liked the way they looked at me, the way they depended on me. It made me feel powerful. I spat, cutting him off. Like some kind of king juggling a harem? You're pathetic. He flinched at my words, but I didn't care. In that moment, I wanted him to feel every ounce of pain he'd inflicted on me, and on those other women. You know what? I said, grabbing my phone and bag. Don't bother explaining. I've heard enough. And don't think for a second I'm going to let you walk away from this unscathed. You might have gotten away with this before, but not this time. As I stormed out of the house, I could hear him calling after me, his voice tinged with desperation. But I didn't stop. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a sense of purpose. Eric's lies had unraveled our life, but he had no idea what was coming next. Part 3: The Other Women. The storm inside me didn't quiet down after I left the house. If anything, it grew fiercer. I couldn't just confront Eric and leave it at that. I needed the full picture. I needed to understand how far his web of lies stretched and what the other women knew. So I did something I never imagined myself doing. I became a sleuth. First there was Jessica. Her texts had been the catalyst for my discovery, so I started with her. I found her on Instagram, her profile set to public, a blessing for my growing curiosity. Scrolling through her posts, I found it all: pictures of her and Eric laughing at a wine-tasting event, Eric helping her pick out flowers at what looked like a wedding boutique, and most damning of all, a photo of her wearing what appeared to be an engagement ring. The caption read, "Counting down the days until I say I do to my soulmate. I can't believe I found my forever." My stomach turned. Eric wasn't just some shady cheater. He was living a double life with this woman. And judging by the comments from her friends, things like, "He's a keeper," and "When's the big day?" She was blissfully unaware of me. Next there was Samantha. I found her on Facebook. Her posts were different, more subdued. But the love she felt for Eric was evident in the captions accompanying pictures of romantic dinners and handwritten notes he'd given her. One in particular caught my eye. A picture of a small cottage-style house with the caption, "Our future home. I can't wait to start this journey with you, babe." Was he planning on moving in with her? My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, wondering how he'd managed to keep all these lives separate. I clicked on her profile picture, an image of her and Eric cheek to cheek, and felt my blood boil. And then there was Lena. She was harder to find, but after some digging through Eric's contacts and emails, I discovered her LinkedIn profile. From there, I tracked down her Instagram, which was filled with photos of her holding a simple gold ring on her finger. In one post, she gushed, "Married life looks good on me." Married? My heart skipped a beat. Was Eric actually married to this woman, or had he just lied to her too? I stared at the screen, my mind racing. How was this even possible? How had I been so blind? These weren't just flings or casual affairs. These were full-blown relationships, each with their own unique brand of deception. Eric had promised Jessica a wedding, Samantha a home, and Lena a marriage. And all the while he'd been coming home to me. Fueled by anger and a deep sense of betrayal, I decided it wasn't enough to just observe from afar. These women deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. One by one I reached out. Jessica responded first, a curt and suspicious, "Who is this?" I introduced myself as Eric's wife, which was met with a string of expletives and disbelief. She demanded proof, so I sent her screenshots of our wedding photos and messages between Eric and me. Her response was instant. "Oh my God. Call me." The phone call was awkward at first, filled with her heavy breathing and my shaky voice. "I don't even know what to say," she finally admitted. "He told me he was divorced, that his ex was the one who cheated on him." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "He's got a good imagination, doesn't he?" Samantha was next. She was quieter, more reserved, but her heartbreak was evident in her trembling voice when we spoke. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "He made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. We were looking at houses together." Lena was the hardest to reach, but when she finally called me back, she was furious. "You're lying," she shouted. "Eric loves me. We're married. He wouldn't do this." "I have proof," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "He's married to me. Legally. I don't know what he told you, but he's been lying to all of us." There was a long pause followed by quiet sobs. I can't believe this," she said. "He even talked about having kids with me." Each conversation left me more drained than the last. These women had been lied to just as much as I had, and while part of me felt vindicated to expose Eric, another part of me mourned for them. We were all victims of his deceit. By the end of the day we had formed an unlikely alliance. A group of women bonded by heartbreak and anger. We shared stories, compared timelines, and slowly began piecing together the full extent of Eric's betrayal. Jessica was the one who suggested we confront him together. "He's gotten away with this for too long," she said, her voice filled with determination. "It's time he faces the consequences." The plan was set. It was time to bring Eric's house of cards crashing down. Part 4. The plan started as a joke, really. Jessica, with her fiery temper and quick wit, suggested we confront Eric at his favorite restaurant. "Let's all show up, sit him down and make him squirm. He deserves that much at least." I laughed at first, but Samantha and Lena didn't. They nodded, their expressions dark. "I'm in," Samantha said quietly. "He thinks he's invincible. Let's remind him he's not." What began as a half-serious suggestion quickly morphed into a full-blown operation. We spent hours on a group call coordinating every detail. Jessica would lure Eric to the restaurant under the pretense of a romantic dinner. Samantha would accidentally arrive a few minutes later, with Lena following shortly after. I was the finale, the grand reveal, armed with evidence to ensure he couldn't talk his way out of it. Jessica, ever the dramatic one, wanted to film the entire thing. "For posterity," she said with a wicked grin. "And maybe for TikTok." The day of the confrontation felt surreal. My nerves were frayed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I hadn't seen Eric since I stormed out of the house, and I wasn't sure how I'd react when I did. Would I cry? Scream? Throw my drink in his face? I practiced all 3 scenarios in my head but still felt unprepared. Jessica texted the group an hour before the meeting. "He's on his way. Ladies, let's do this." The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place Eric loved to show off. Dim lighting, soft jazz playing in the background, waiters in crisp uniforms gliding between tables. Jessica was already seated when I arrived, looking stunning in a red dress that screamed confidence. "There's my wife," she whispered with a smirk, referencing Eric's lie. Eric walked in 5 minutes later, his face lighting up when he saw Jessica. He leaned down to kiss her cheek, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. "You look beautiful," he said, taking a seat across from her. Jessica played her part perfectly, laughing at his jokes, letting him order wine for the table. I watched from the bar, my stomach churning as I saw him act like the charming husband I used to know. Samantha walked in next, her face carefully composed. She approached their table with a look of practiced surprise. "Eric," she said, feigning shock. "What are you doing here?" Eric's smile faltered. "Samantha? What are you doing here?" I thought we were meeting here for dinner, she replied, her voice dripping with innocence. You know, to discuss the house we're buying? Jessica raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair. House? What house, Eric? Before he could respond, Lena entered the restaurant, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. She made a beeline for the table, her expression a mixture of confusion and fury. Eric, why are you here with these women? You told me you were working late. Eric's face turned a shade of pale I didn't know was possible. He glanced between them, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Lena, this isn't what it looks like. Oh really? Lena snapped. Because it looks like you're having dinner with two women you promised to marry. Am I missing something? That was my cue. I stood up from the bar and walked over, my heels clicking with the kind of confidence I didn't feel. Oh, you're definitely missing something, I said, placing a stack of printed screenshots on the table. Hi, Eric. Remember me? Your actual wife. The silence that followed was deafening. Eric looked like he might faint, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. I can explain, he stammered. Jessica crossed her arms. Oh, please do. I'd love to hear how you plan to explain this. For the next 10 minutes we took turns laying out every lie, every broken promise, every thread of deceit. Jessica slammed her wine glass down when she talked about the wedding deposits. Samantha showed photos of the house Eric was supposedly buying for them. Lena waved her cheap ring in his face, demanding to know if it had been bought from a vending machine. Eric tried to defend himself, but every excuse fell flat. It's not what you think, he kept repeating, as if that would somehow undo the damage. Eric, I finally said, my voice calm but cold. You didn't just cheat on me. You built entire lives with these women. You lied to all of us, made promises you never intended to keep. Did you even think about the damage you were doing? Or were you so caught up in your own ego that you didn't care? He looked at me, his eyes filled with something that might have been remorse. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sorry isn't enough, Lena said, standing up. You're going to pay for what you've done. As the three of us left the restaurant together, leaving Eric alone with his shattered facade, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't alone. And neither were they. Together, we had taken the first step in reclaiming our lives. Part 5: The Fallout. If Eric thought the confrontation at the restaurant was the end of his problems, he was sorely mistaken. That night had only been the beginning. What followed was a series of events that systematically dismantled the life he'd so carefully crafted. The morning after the confrontation, Jessica wasted no time. She went straight to social media, posting a detailed account of Eric's lies, complete with photos and screenshots. Her caption read, "This man is not just a cheater, he's a con artist. Engaged to 3 women while married to a 4th. Ladies, always do your research." Within hours her post went viral, and the comments section turned into a feeding frenzy of internet detectives eager to dig deeper into Eric's sordid past. Meanwhile, Samantha took a more direct approach. She contacted Eric's employer, sharing the scandal with his boss and HR department. As it turned out, his business trips and late-night meetings hadn't just been lies to us, they'd been lies to his job as well. He was immediately suspended pending an investigation into potential misuse of company funds. Lena, ever the practical one, decided to hit him where it hurt the most: his wallet. She filed a lawsuit against him for fraud, claiming emotional damages and seeking reimbursement for the marriage expenses he duped her into paying. The ring, the honeymoon deposit, the fake wedding photos. She had receipts for everything. And me? I filed for divorce the day after the confrontation. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, not because I still loved Eric, I didn't, but because it felt like admitting defeat. The man I thought I'd spend my life with was a stranger, and our marriage was a lie. But filing those papers was also freeing. It was my way of taking control, of saying I deserved better than the mess he'd made. Eric tried to do damage control. He called me dozens of times, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between begging for forgiveness and accusing me of overreacting. He sent flowers to my workplace, which I promptly gave away to a coworker. He even showed up at my door one evening, looking haggard and desperate. "Please let me explain," he said, his voice cracking. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "Explain what, Eric? How you managed to juggle 4 women at once. How you thought you could get away with it." "I made mistakes," he said, his eyes pleading. "I got in too deep and I didn't know how to stop. But I love you. You're the one I want to be with. I laughed bitterly. Love? You don't know the first thing about love. You love yourself, Eric, and that's it. Now get off my porch before I call the police. He hesitated, as if considering whether to push further, but then he saw the fire in my eyes and backed down. As he walked away, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. For the first time, I didn't feel like his victim. I felt like a survivor. The fallout didn't stop there. As Jessica's posts continued to circulate, more women began coming forward. 2 others claimed they'd also been involved with Eric, though their relationships hadn't progressed to the level of engagement. One even mentioned that he'd borrowed money from her, promising to pay it back once he landed a big promotion. Eric became infamous online, his face plastered across countless memes and cautionary tales. His reputation was ruined not just personally but professionally. No one wanted to hire a man whose name was now synonymous with deception. Despite all this, there were moments when the fallout felt bittersweet. I couldn't help but think about the life I'd envisioned with Eric, the plans we'd made, the dreams we'd shared. It hurt to know those things had been a lie, but it also reminded me of my own resilience. I stayed in touch with Jessica, Samantha, and Lena. What started as a group brought together by betrayal grew into an unexpected friendship. We supported each other through the emotional aftermath, sharing laughs, tears, and even a few glasses of wine. One evening, as we sat together at Jessica's apartment, Lena raised her glass. "To us," she said, her voice steady. "We might have been played, but we're the ones who won." We clinked glasses, a small but meaningful celebration of the strength we'd found in each other. As for Eric, the last I heard, he'd moved out of town, unable to face the wreckage he'd left behind. Part of me hoped he'd learned something from all this, but another part didn't care. My focus was on moving forward, on building a life where I could trust again, not just others but myself. The fallout was messy, painful, and at times overwhelming. But in the end, it taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes destruction clears the way for something better to grow. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have confronted Eric in a public setting? Or handled it differently? How would you have started to rebuild your life after such a betrayal? Write in the comments. Part 6: Moving Forward. 6 months later, the dust had finally begun to settle. The chaos Eric had left in his wake was still a fresh memory, but it no longer consumed my thoughts. Slowly but surely, I had started to rebuild my life on my terms this time. The divorce was finalized a month ago. Seeing Eric's signature on those papers felt like closing the last chapter of a book I never wanted to read again. I celebrated the day with Jessica, Samantha, and Lena, the 3 women who had unexpectedly become some of my closest friends. We'd all taken different paths since the fallout. Jessica dove headfirst into self-care, documenting her journey on social media, and using her viral post about Eric to launch a blog about relationships and self-worth. Samantha decided to move to another city, wanting a fresh start away from the memories. Lena, ever pragmatic, threw herself into her work, channeling her energy into growing her business. And me? I learned to breathe again. I started going to therapy, something I'd always dismissed before. It was tough at first, reopening old wounds, questioning my self-worth, but over time, it became a safe space for me to process everything. My therapist reminded me that Eric's betrayal said more about him than it ever did about me. One of the most surprising parts of this journey was rediscovering who I was outside of being Eric's wife. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, like painting and hiking. I reconnected with old friends who reminded me of the person I used to be before my life revolved around a man who didn't deserve it. There were still moments when the hurt would sneak up on me. I'd see a happy couple holding hands or stumble upon an old photo of Eric and me during happier times, and the pang of loss would hit. But those moments didn't last as long as they used to. As for love, I wasn't ready to dive back in, but I wasn't completely closed off to the idea either. The thought of dating again felt daunting, but also exciting in a way I hadn't expected. I knew that when I was ready, I'd approach it differently this time. No blind trust, no ignoring red flags. I ran into Eric once purely by chance. It was at a grocery store in a neighboring town. He looked older, more tired, like the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. He didn't say anything, just gave me a small nod and walked away. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a quiet sense of closure. My favorite part of moving forward was how much I'd grown to appreciate the small joys in life. An afternoon spent reading on the porch, the taste of my favorite coffee, laughter shared with friends. Those moments reminded me that life didn't end with Eric's betrayal. If anything, it began anew. Sometimes I'd think back to the night we confronted him at the restaurant and I'd smile. What felt like the worst day of my life had become the turning point for something better. It wasn't just about exposing Eric. It was about reclaiming my narrative. To anyone out there reading this, know this: betrayal doesn't define you. It's painful, yes, but it's also an opportunity to grow, to heal, and to discover your own strength. And if you're lucky, you might even find people who understand your pain and stand beside you through it.